It's August 2023. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being burned across the gaming industry. Studios with armies of thousands of developers, billion-dollar marketing budgets, the hottest engines money can buy, all scrambling to ship something, anything. And then, a Belgian studio with around 450 people quietly drops a game. No hype machine, no battle pass, no microtransactions. Just a game. A finished game. Within 24 hours, it had 800,000 people playing it simultaneously on Steam alone. It didn't just crash the charts. It broke Steam itself. The servers buckled, people were being redirected to buy it from other storefronts because the system couldn't handle the demand. That game was Baldur's Gate 3. And it didn't just win Game of the Year. It became the first game in history to sweep all 5 major Game of the Year ceremonies. Not 1, not 2, all 5. But here's what makes this story truly devastating for AAA gaming. Larian Studios proved that everything the big publishers told you was a lie.
Let's talk about what Larian Studios actually made, because the numbers are almost unbelievable. Baldur's Gate 3 contains over 2 million words of script. For context, that's about twice the length of the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. The game has over 173,000 voice files spread across more than 2,000 speaking characters. A fan once pulled every single audio file from the game's data and added them up. The total? 236 hours, 55 minutes, and 45 seconds of recorded dialogue. Nearly 10 full days of voice acting. When Sven Vincke, Larian CEO, saw that post, his response was genuinely priceless. He said the studio wasn't really keeping track. Compare that to Starfield, Bethesda's flagship 2023 RPG release, which had around 250,000 dialogue lines. Cyberpunk 2077 had roughly 73,000. Baldur's Gate 3 had 173,000 voice files, and that's not counting the sheer duration. The game takes an average of 200 hours to complete a single playthrough. And because your choices actually matter, in ways most games only pretend they do, no 2 playthroughs are the same. Larian regaled that at least one variation of a scene had been experienced by barely 30 players worldwide. Now here's what makes all of this shocking. Larian did this with roughly 450 employees. Studios like Ubisoft routinely have 10,000 plus people across multiple studios. EA has entire divisions. And yet, a studio that hadn't released the game since 2017, Divinity Original Sin 2, came back, tripled its own size internally, and made something that no one with 10 times the resources could match. Over its launch weekend alone, players collectively logged over 10 million hours. That's 1,225 years of gameplay in a single weekend. Larian expected peak concurrent players around 100,000. They got 875,000.
But the numbers aren't actually what embarrassed AAA gaming. Numbers can be explained away. It's the philosophy behind Baldur's Gate 3 that cut deepest. When you buy Baldur's Gate 3, you get the full game. No season pass, no premium edition with content cut out, no battle pass, no microtransactions. The updates that Larian pushed out after launch, new subclasses, an expanded epilogue, additional content, bug fixes, were all completely free. Every single one. In an era where a $70 game routinely asks you to spend another $30, $40 on a season pass, this was almost incomprehensible. Sven Vincke once summed up Larian's philosophy at the 2023 Game Awards, and he said it plainly. He showed up wearing armor, literal armor, because, as he explained, Baldur's Gate 3 was a game that couldn't exist without its player community, and he wanted to pay tribute to them. He talked about how his developers don't treat money as a goal. They treat it as fuel. Fuel to make the next thing. The journey is what matters, not the profit margin. Try to imagine a CEO of EA or Ubisoft saying that. You cannot. And when fans begged for DLC, because of course they did, it was the best game in years, Larian said no. Not because they couldn't make money from it. They absolutely could have. Vincke was honest about it. The money's going to pile up, he said. They knew that.
But when the team actually sat down and thought about making DLC, the answer was clear. It's boring, Finke said. There's just no passion. You need a happy developer for a happy player. A major AAA publisher would have shipped 5 DLC packs by now, bled the IP dry, and started working on Baldur's Gate 3 Mobile Edition. Larian instead chose to move on to something new, something ambitious, because that's what their developers wanted to make. This is what passion-driven development looks like, and it's been so long since we've seen it at this scale that the entire industry had forgotten it was even possible.
Here's where the story gets fascinating and a little bit pathetic. When Baldur's Gate 3 became an unstoppable critical phenomenon, game developers on social media didn't celebrate. They panicked. And then, embarrassingly, some of them went on the offensive. A Twitter thread from a developer at Strange Scaffold Studios started circulating, arguing that players shouldn't use Baldur's Gate 3 as a new standard because the time, effort, and cost to make it is unrealistic. An Xbox accessibility manager called the scope of Baldur's Gate 3 rockstar-level nonsense and suggested that only a few studio groups could even try this, and that this kind of effort likely won't be replicated this decade. Let that sink in. A senior person at Xbox, one of the largest gaming companies on the planet, was essentially arguing that players should expect less, that a smaller studio's achievement was so threatening that it needed to be publicly dismissed. IGN ran a video titled Baldur's Gate 3 is causing some developers to panic, and they weren't wrong. It was causing panic. The wrong response to that panic would have been to ask players to lower their expectations. The right response would have been to look inward and ask how a team of 450 people made something that studios of 5,000 couldn't. The real answer, of course, is one that publishers will never accept. It's not about the budget, it's about the culture. Larian builds games because they love games. Their CEO wears armor to award shows. They canceled their own DLC because they didn't find it creatively exciting, not because a focus group told them to, not because a shareholder called, because the developers weren't passionate, and a developer who isn't passionate doesn't make great games. The AAA model has systematically squeezed passion out of game development. It's replaced it with data dashboards, monetization consultants, live service roadmaps, and crunch schedules. By 2026, even the loudest advocates of the old system can see it isn't working. Fast forward to right now, 2026. Baldur's Gate 3 has sold over 20 million copies worldwide. It added roughly 5 million of those sales in 2025 alone, 2 full years after launch. The player count actually grew 20% in 2024, driven by modding support and word of mouth. On most weekends, over 100,000 people are still playing it. For a single-player game, years after release, with no live service hooks, no fear of missing out mechanics, no seasonal events designed to drag you back. People just keep playing because it's good. Larian's pre-tax profit for 2023 alone hit 249 million euros, a 20-fold increase from the year before. Revenue reached 427 million euros. The studio started 2022 prepared to take a loss. They ended it by becoming one of the most profitable game studios on Earth. Meanwhile, what happened to the competition? Ubisoft continued restructuring, cutting studios across Europe. BioWare was reduced to a skeleton crew. Concord is gone. Suicide Squad servers are dark. The live service gold rush that publishers bet their entire futures on is showing serious cracks. A survey by Media Research found that 53% of gamers now prefer single-player games over live service titles. The audience has spoken loudly with their wallets and their hours. They want what Baldur's Gate 3 gave them, a complete world, real choices, stories that breathe, characters they actually care about, a game that respects their time and their money. What's remarkable is that Baldur's Gate 3 didn't invent these ideas. They're as old as gaming itself. Larian just remembered them, while everyone else forgot. Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in a boardroom wants to say out loud. The problem was never money, technology, or team size. The problem is incentive structure. When a studio answers to shareholders who demand quarterly growth, you don't make Baldur's Gate 3. You make a safe sequel with a battle pass. You make a live service title with 18-month content roadmaps because recurring revenue is predictable. You ship an unfinished product because Q4 deadlines don't move.
Larian is majority owned by Sven Vinke and his wife, with Tencent holding a minority stake. The studio still operates with the creative freedom that publicly traded companies simply cannot afford to give their teams. That's not a coincidence. That's the whole story. And by 2026, the Larian publishing director Michael Dowse is out here publicly saying that AAA is perversely fascinated by indie games, because indie developers still understand how to make games from a good idea rather than from a spreadsheet. He said choosing something specific and doing it well has become a lost art in game design. A lost art in game design, the thing the entire industry exists to do. That's the indictment. Not from a critic, not from a player, from someone who works inside one of the most successful studios in modern gaming history.
Baldur's Gate 3's story isn't really about a video game. It's about a moment when the mask slipped. For years, publishers told us that massive budgets required microtransactions, that games needed to be live services to be sustainable, that a fully complete, no-strings-attached game was a relic of the past, that passion was a luxury studios couldn't afford. Baldur's Gate 3 looked the entire industry in the eye and said, "That's not true. That was never true. You just stopped caring." A team of 450 people working out of 7 offices across Europe built something with 236 hours of voice acting, over 2 million words of story, 20 million sales worldwide, and an industry-wide reckoning without a single paid DLC, without a loot box, without a live service model. They built a game, a real one, and it embarrassed everyone.